Welcome back to the It's All Opinion podcast. This is episode 5. I am your host, Nate Spurlin. Welcome to the only podcast where it's just straight facts. And if it's not facts, I guess it's an opinion. Thank you for listening or watching. Well, thank you for watching on YouTube or listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Anchor, or other DSPs that I won't name. It's like mad DSPs. It's like so much to get into. I really don't want to. Also, do us a favor, hit the like button and subscribe to the YouTube page or Spotify page or Apple Podcast page or whatever DSP page is the way that you're listening to this. And obviously follow us on Instagram and Twitter at OldMilk Media. I am here with the 5th guest in this series. One of the only 3 reasons why I care about the Boston Celtics, Bobby Manning.
Bobby, you care? I didn't know you cared.
Oh yeah, I mean, I care because I want the claps to come so I can be insufferable in the group chat.
Oh, all right. This has been your plan. I think you and Lindo, you've been dead quiet in our group chat for weeks now because they've won 19-25 and you're waiting for the collapse, but I don't see it. I don't see how anyone's going to solve this defense. They found the cheat code and they're going to be dangerous. And I was in a dark place like many early January.
I'm not going to lie.
Adjustments.
I'm not going to lie. The one thing that's hilarious is that I need with the Celtics, I need a middle ground because they can't be too good or else you guys are insufferable, but they can't be too bad or else you guys don't say anything. Like I need them to be like around maybe like 550 or something. Like I think that's the perfect sweet spot for our conversations in the group chat.
Well, it's on 100 now. You are going to hear finals predictions from me, which is saying something. And I said in my other group chat that win over the Grizzlies Thursday, and there's going to be obscene, but that was a take your pants off kind of win. That was
take your pants off type of win. What is that?
Take your pants off, start spinning it around. It's party time. That was electric what they did against Memphis there on Thursday. That was great, and that was a prove-it win. I mean, those are the 2 hottest teams in the NBA right now, the Grizzlies and the Celtics. And the Celtics kind of handled them. You're impressed, aren't you, Nate?
I was kind of impressed. I think that the one thing about the first half was that Ja just wasn't attacking. And I understand that it's credit to your defense because you have whoever's on Ja is giving him that cushion to force him to shoot. And it seemed like he was determined to prove them wrong. Like, no, you should guard this. I can shoot. But it just wasn't falling, and he kept taking those shots anyway. But I think that the one thing that Josh should have done, like any explosive player in the league who really can't shoot, like when you look at LeBron in Miami before, when they used to give him that cushion, is just attack, get to the line, and see it go through the net a couple of times before you start shooting those threes. And I think that that's probably the reason why they lost. Charles Barkley after the game said that it was a bad performance from Ja Morant just based on how he attacked the game, and I agree with that.
He wasn't sharp, and he carries a heavy load for sure. I mean, they have some guys there. Desmond Bane's pretty good. Dylan Brooks have obviously been missing for a while, but he is carrying that load, like enough to make you say that he could be an MVP candidate. He's somewhere on this mountain that we keep building here and changing names week in and week out. He's there. I mean, that was the quietest 38 I've ever seen in Boston. And he had no makes in the first quarter when he was jacking those shots, like you said. So that was super impressive. I also think what's cool with him is he is starting to get like ovations and respect in every single arena he goes to. I know that doesn't happen in Boston often where guys introduced in starting lineups. Normally a good guy's introduced, they get booed there. But it was a pretty loud applause for him in the Garden. And like the place was packed just to see what he was going to do. Like the reaction to that left-handed throwdown he had was unreal. And then he was on the break when he dropped the ball a few quarters later, and everyone was just like gasping, ready to see what he was going to do there. And he was even coming away smiling because he's putting on a show right now. I mean, that's what this is all about when they're looking for a new face of the league. He's got what it takes. Giannis certainly has what it takes. There's a lot of good candidates for it. They're trying to put Zion on. It's not happening.
Have you noticed? And I think I pointed this out in the group chat like yesterday. Have you noticed that ever since they did that new Zach LaVine Mountain Dew commercial with, I think it's Charlie Day in it too, we have not seen the Zion Williamson.
And it makes me miss that one because this one's annoying as hell. It's bad.
Yeah, like, I mean, The
The
point of
takeaway
it, I guess, is
song.
like for like I guess it's like more so like, oh yo, like look at all this subliminal advertising we could do. And I guess in terms of concept, they definitely get the job done, but I definitely agree with you. I think that it
No, it's
also
catching
can
my
be kind of
attention
annoying.
every time,
Yeah,
but it's
no,
gonna
like
get old fast.
it is well done though. But we can obviously talk about basketball forever. So let's actually talk about you. I we're friends, and I talk about this all the time too. Like we're all friends in this group chat, and we barely know anything about each other, which is hilarious to me. So the first question is simply, can you talk about your upbringing and also your first interaction with the sport of basketball?
Ooh, so I always play a little bit of basketball, obviously, because I'm on the taller side. Not something you would know about, Nate. I'm sorry, I had to throw that in there. But I wasn't great growing up, and I probably enjoyed playing baseball more. I like baseball more. When I was young, me and my uncle used to go to the games over at Fenway. We'd watch a bunch of Red Sox. It was a fun sport back then, a lot of personalities. And that's what I think we're all attracted to with basketball now is like the storylines and the people. And that's certainly like me as a writer and media person. There's a lot to unpack there that makes it very appealing. And baseball had that about 10, 15 years ago. And it's seeped away. I know it's going to be like 9 years now since the Red Sox won in 2013, which was really like the last year before last year that I was all into. And that group just had so many personalities, like Shane Victorino, Ellsbury was great, Pedroia,
Big
Ortiz
Poppy.
certainly was
Yeah.
larger than life. Miss him so much. And there's no one really to fill that gap anymore. So baseball, it obviously got slow, uh, like monotonous with the style that they're obviously fighting over right now, trying to figure out. And a bunch of other things. I mean, you get busy, you get older, you don't have time to watch that full game unless you're going. And basketball, I got the chance to go to a lot of Celtics games during that year after Paul Pierce and Garnett got traded because the tickets were like $13 max. You could go up to the window and just grab them, and then you move up because there were open seats way up front because they were playing Chris Humphries and Courtney Lee and Marshawn Brooks, and I think they had like 30 players that year that came in and out, and Rondo was hurt. It was bad. So they were obviously one of the worst teams in the league, but you got to go see the Warriors during that first year when they were really getting it going, and all these other great teams like the Cavs and Kyrie Irving. I remember going to watch back then, and I went to like 15, 20 games that year. So I was interested in getting in the media around that time. Obviously, the Celtics were one of the teams I was into. They weren't the team, but I had accessibility to the stadium, and I started talking to a lot of media types there who, the media area is kind of like right in the low seating area there. So I got to meet a lot of people going to those games. I obviously got to be up close, tweeting about it a lot, connecting with people. I was tweeting about the games, and that's sort of what made me fall in love with the NBA is that it was just so accessible. Like Fenway's expensive. It's hard. You go to like one, maybe two Red Sox games a year. Bruins wicked expensive. Patriots is like obviously off the charts. So I was able to go to a lot of the Celtics games, and that kind of made me feel close to them and really got me into the NBA as a whole because we saw a lot of the other great teams that were out there that year.
Yeah, for sure. That actually kind of a lot of questions that I thought of kind of touched on that. I could think just to go in chronological order. So can you talk about the moment that you realized that you wanted to pursue uh reporting on sports like for real?
It was probably the fact that I got to cover my high school football team, and I obviously knew like a lot of people there. I was a pretty shy guy when I got to high school, like first year. I didn't really have like a lot going on for me. I wasn't great at sports, obviously. I did a little track when I got in there, but um, that like kind of gave me an identity there. Starting like late my sophomore year, but really early my junior year, I decided to like do my own beat covering the football team, and I was writing for a blog about Boston sports back then, and opportunities were hard to come by. I was trying to like get in and cover some of the big teams, and there obviously weren't opportunities to do that, and maybe write with some of the big papers around. They weren't really having it, so I just started doing stuff on my own, tweeting a lot certainly. Then that first year that I got to write about the football team there, they were amazing. And we didn't have a great football team, so they were like a big surprise. There was one kid at running back, his name was Doug Santos, who had like a historic year for the high school, and he really like changed the culture in the room and stuff like that. And it was, a coach who adopted him. He was a guy from Brazil who, was living in different cities around Boston, eventually landed in Peabody there. And him and the coach were pretty tight, and they sort of revamped the team there. And it was a great story, good personalities on that team. Obviously, I was the only one like covering them, so I could just go and talk to like 10, 15 people after the games, which isn't really the case with like professional sports. It's very limited, and you only get a few minutes with the guys and stuff, and it's all like very scripted a lot of the times. I mean, these were people my age that I knew, that I had a connection with, and it sort of gave me like a new level of confidence going out there and making that happen on my own. And it was a lot of fun. I spent a lot of Friday nights going to those games. They were fun games. A lot of them were like back and forth right down the wire. And they were in the running with some of the best teams in the state, like Everett and uh, you know, Zavarian, I think it was called, and some of these other like big time football powers in Mass. They were never there like the last 10, 20 years before that, but I got to kind of cover those 2 years that they really were. And senior year was pretty cool too, because he came back. He had an even better year with a worse team around him, Santos. And they made like another improbable run, like the second round of the playoffs, just a couple wins short of the Super Bowl. So those were really fun experiences. They really appreciated the coverage that I gave them, which felt good. And like I won a couple of awards doing it. People read it around the school, which I thought was awesome. So that's like where I really decided, like, all right, I can do this. It's just going to be a case of opportunity. And certainly like I was doing all that Celtic stuff I talked about at the same time. And eventually like a couple of different opportunities came up to write about them as well. Especially Celtics blog late my senior year, I got involved with. And that was really when like things started rolling in the Syracuse.
So what advice would you have for someone who is just now trying to, first of all, figure out if reporting is for them in the first place, and secondly, once they do decide that reporting is for them, like how to get into how to get their foot in the door?
I think just doing it, it's easy to do it now. You just go out there and start a blog, and I think a lot of different newspapers and stuff around. If you're young, like you'll be able to get in there and like pick up some assignments and stuff, and start young. Like that was a big advantage for me, I think, is that like I was so young and I was so far away when I got started that a lot of like the older people that I met were willing to like mentor me and give advice and become friends. I think that gets tougher when you're further along, I've noticed. And that's still something I'm trying to like restart, is like forming those mentorships and connections and relationships and stuff. Cause you're kind of in the flow of things when you get going, and you don't really always make time for that. It's very easy when you got nothing going on at the beginning to like make as many connections as you can there. So that's number one. And then in terms of if it's for you, I think people have said this to me when they've like complimented my work, is just like how the consistency, like I'm doing it day in and day out. I'm writing about like every single game. Obviously there's like a day in day out thing. You can see like the passion I got in the group chat there, that like I'm just firing things off at all hours. Like you gotta make it your passion, because for most people there's not a lot of money in it. There's long hours, like you're working almost every day of the week, and it's late at night. So those are all things you gotta be like ready for. It's not like a normal job where it's gonna be very scripted, and you get your time off, and all the different like benefits of normal jobs. It's a little strange, and you almost have to kind of make it your personality and passion, which I found a pretty easy job doing. If not, like the downsides of the industry are really going to get to you. So you have to be able to kind of push those aside, have like a good level of confidence, because a lot of people are going to say no to you, especially early on too. So you got to be ready to deal with that. That still happens to me a lot. And I'd say the other thing is that you just have to enjoy doing it, because it can be a grind, especially writing, which is kind of my thing, even though I've gotten into a lot of other mediums. Like it's just kind of you sitting there with the computer screen. You feel this probably, Nate, too, as a guy who writes. Like it can be a battle sometimes to really get that going. And when you really don't feel like it, you have to force yourself through and get it done. And if you have a level of pride with it, you're going to be nitpicking it and really like going at it for hours. Like I was up almost all night last night writing, and it can get tough. You can get tired. You definitely have to take some breaks and, like really care for yourself with a lot of the things that go on in media. But if it's what you really want to do, you have like a really easy time going with it. And I think you'll feel that pretty early on when you're trying it. Like even at Syracuse, I saw a lot of people who were like interested in it, but weren't all the way in. And you could tell that they didn't have a lot of success with it because it wasn't like them.
So that actually brings me okay. So that actually takes me out of order a little bit because you brought up writing. I just want to what is one of the most underrated challenges in writing about basketball? Do you think?
Probably not being cliche, I'd say. Like, there's a lot of like buzzwords and stuff that people use, and for like a lot of, I'd say, like narratives too that people just end up catching on to and saying the same stuff one after another. Like, I think being fresh is tough in the basketball lane because everybody's talking about it. Everybody's got like these ideas of what's right and what's wrong and what's going on and what's happening, and to stand out in that lane is hard. And I still battle with that, like what's going to make me unique on a Celtics beat where there's like dozens and dozens of people covering this team, either in the room or around the world or blogging. Like, I'd say there's probably over 100 people covering the Celtics, at least, in a variety of different ways: podcasts, videos, streams, articles, blogs. Like, it's probably one of the most covered teams there is in sports. So that's tough. And I've found ways to do it, but that's still something like I'm trying to answer right now in my first year, like really going all in on this is how are you going to be unique? Like, what are you bringing to the table that other people aren't? There's a lot of people like doing a great job with stats now. That's sort of my thing as well. But, there's some people that do that really well, even better than me. So I try to hone in around like the personalities and the people. And that's been tough during the pandemic because you don't get a lot of time with them. But I've been able to do a few pieces, especially during the off season, that like really shine lights on like the personal sides of these people. And that's a hard thing to do. So I always try to go toward like the more difficult things because I know there's going to be less of a crowd there, like getting after family members, meeting them, doing the tough, deep interviews with like people who knew them early in their lives and doing a lot of interviews. A lot of people have a hesitancy to pick up the phone, and I feel that too. Like, that's one of the hardest things about this industry is like calling strangers and really making like deep bonds with strangers. And, I actually give Syracuse some credit for that because I had a wicked hard class where you had to go out on the street in Syracuse and like really meet the people. And like one of them was like me and like opioid addicts. And that was tough, like going over to like the rehab and like meeting those people and like, trying to like get their trust and like get them to talk to you and stuff. Like, that's hard, especially for a guy who's like kind of naturally shy like me, a very anxious guy like me. That's like the hardest part of this by far is breaking out of your like comfort zone, because that's the only way you're going to stand out, I'd say.
Mm-hmm. So what is it like to have frequent conversations with athletes? Like I'm like you posted, I think it was like a 2-year anniversary of you talking to Carmelo Anthony and reminiscing with him about South Campus and at Syracuse University. So what is that like to have those frequent conversations and have those relationships with, for example, I know that sometimes you have questions for the Celtics players. So being able to talk to Jason Tatum or Jaylen Brown or even Rob Williams, like what is that like?
It definitely takes down the allure of them because obviously this whole like TV product and marketing and all the kind of stuff that builds these guys up is larger than life. But even just like walking by them in the hallway, it definitely like takes down that like mountaintop that these guys are standing on. And a lot of them are pretty humble guys. Like Tatum's a super humble guy when it comes to like his background and even just his lifestyle and persona now, I'd say is like very low key. And obviously he's got his son. He's just kind of like this old soul dad who's only 24 and has like, this $30 million contract and a nice car. But, he's just sort of that same guy who was balling in St. Louis, and, he's doing it at a higher level now and trying to make it like one of the greats and all the different guys that he looked up to. I wrote about that last week, like how this driving force behind him definitely seems to be like the Kobe's and the Durants and these guys that he really idolized growing up. So it's kind of cool to get into like their backgrounds. Like I find all of these guys' backgrounds so interesting. Like we talked about Derek White, like he comes here and his dad was a Celtics fan who grew up in Boston. It's like, whoa, that's crazy they ended up here. And Al Horford, obviously behind me there, like that's a guy coming from DR, which just like doesn't happen in the NBA, and becoming one of the great big men in the game is super cool story. Like even this Ukraine thing, like this thing's going on now, and there's 2 NBA players from Ukraine. Like who knew that? And Svi Mikhailuk and Alex Len, like the different, like the international angle of the game, and just like the array of stories that these guys have coming up, whether it's Dennis Rodman and the community college story and him growing there, like all that height there, Giannis in Greece, that story is just insane. Like there's just countless amazing stories, whether it's like the stars or the back end guys who are barely hanging on. And I think that gap's kind of cool too, because there definitely is within same locker rooms. There's a LeBron and there's an Austin Reeves who's just trying to make it. And those guys are working together on the court at the same time and trying to gel with each other. And they're just drastically different lifestyles and personalities and people. And that makes this all endlessly coverable. I mean, there's just something going on every day with this league, and it never ends, which is great. I mean, I can't even imagine covering baseball 162 days where there's not a lot going on and there's not a lot of stories, really. It's my favorite part about this is the people, and that's what I'm trying to hone in on. Like I said, it's difficult. I think the PR, team shield that gets put up makes that tough to do. You obviously can't even really get to know these guys and talk to them face to face a lot of the time now. I'm on Zoom most of the time, like 90%. So that definitely limits the connections that you can make. But a couple of years ago, I got to talk to Taco for like 10 minutes about his background and coming from Africa and the work he went back to do there, which was super cool. And that's my passion in all of this. I care about the games. I care about like the debates, and I care about the stats and all that different kind of stuff because it's what people care about. But I care about like those stories. Like there are some amazing stories there, and I still think of like a lot that I really want to do, that I have like this massive list I'm trying to check off, and it's tough, but that's like my driving force in this.
Do you mind sharing some of the things on that list?
Chris Duarte's one for sure. I mean, he's another guy who came from DR. He's 24, is a rookie. He went to like this weird school in Massachusetts and had to learn English and started basketball pretty late in high school. And now he's like one of the best rookies with the Pacers there. He's got a pretty incredible story that I think is already out there, but probably has more layers than people know about. So I'm excited to work on that. I kind of want to talk to Horford too about that, because that's a guy I think he idolized. They came from the same city there in DR. Who else am I trying to write about? I kind of want to do like a career retrospective on Horford too, because I think the way his game's evolved over the years has been pretty cool, going back to the Hawks and now being this guy who has had to recreate himself several times. What else? There's a bunch of stuff that I have kicking around for sure. But those are 2 big ones that I'm working on right now. Is there anything else off the top? The draft's always an interesting thing you look ahead to. I think there's some really interesting guys in the draft coming up. But yeah, those are the big ones for sure. Nick Stauskas just came back to the Celtics.
2 years, I believe, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's insane. I think I saw it's funny, over the past 2 weeks I saw that he's been having big games in the G League. Even Isaiah Thomas just got signed in Charlotte for 10 days because he was having some big games in the G League too.
That was a great story in the middle of the year when all those guys were getting scooped up on those 10 days. Like Joe Johnson came back to the Celtics. You had Lance Stevenson, who's been with the Pacers all year. That was like the craziest thing ever when you had all those replacement players. It was like the replacement refs in the NFL that year.
Yeah,
Not really, but
it was
but
more
you had some
nostalgia
crazy
on the
you had some
NBA side for sure.
crazy starting lineups out there during that time. Like it was, but the Hawks had like 4 replacement players alongside Young at one point. It was nuts.
So we talked about your place in NBA media, but just like as an overall, when you sit back and you look at the landscape of NBA media, what do you think about it? What do you think about the current state of NBA media right now?
Well, the first thing I think about is the players, and I think there's been a lot of incidents over the last month or so here, and it's become so easy, I think, for teams and players to say, "Oh, the media, oh, the Nets were doing it with the whole Harden debacle," and obviously the media was right about what was going on there, and Russ having his back and forth with the reporter there in LA. And I sort of just roll my eyes at a lot of it. It's an easy target. It's been going on as long as time. I think it's always easy to blame the media for a lot of stuff. But at the same time, like the media does get a step up in its own right. Like I was just even thinking about earlier, the ball sack sports thing we're always laughing about there. And when you do get into it, a couple of people were talking on the Twitter line today that it actually is kind of a cool like experiment and just like the flashiness and like the instant the quote that you see across Twitter and you don't even really think about what it is, and it just sort of reinforces what your mind state is on something. I think that's something that the media has to do better with, especially around basketball, is actually doing the homework. And I think some of the question asking is terrible in these press conference settings. It's hard. I've probably asked some terrible questions myself, but a lot of it's just so like basic and vague. In fact, the question that Russ got asked there about like, what was your expectation, or like, how does this compare? Did this go as you expected? Right? Like that was the question. Like that's a terrible question. And it's just a lot of it's done to either like show off or get your viral moment as like the interviewer there in the room. And there's not a great, I understand the thinking behind that. If you're a reporter or you're in the media and you're trying to like get your moment there and generate some content, but it's not really going to be yours. I mean, a lot of the time when I'm in those settings, like I'm trying to get a quote that really hits. A lot of the time you're really trying to get like a one-on-one quote that really hits, so no one else has it. And when something like that happens, you just end up looking like an ass. I remember the finals when LeBron got up and walked away after the guy kept asking about like the J.R. Smith running away situation. And like, it was so obvious what the guy was trying to do there. I think the media does have to be a lot better in a lot of different circumstances about just like being prepared, asking better questions, like stepping up to the plate. Like this is the pros, this is the NBA. Like these are like the top of their game guys, and they're smart. Like they know how to answer questions. They know when it's BS. They know when it's like when guys are trying to get at something divisive or something like that, or just like get a headline or get like a clickbait quote there. And when guys are really trying to do something real, I mean, when I got Melo in the locker room there, you mentioned that one. I went up to him. It was in Orlando in the room when you could do that, which was, I only got to do a handful of times before the pandemic. And I basically said like, hey, you got a few minutes to talk about Syracuse? And like no one else there was asking about that. They were asking about like his 3-point percentage or like how he's fitting in with the Trailblazers back then, or just like the game he had, which just like come firing away. You got something unique and you got some homework that you've done and questions that you've prepared and background research that you've done. Like I always point to Nadwar in those interviews he does. Like that's the peak of interviewing, right? Like you got all the background info. You've talked to all these different people who know these guys, and you know what you're gonna bring something that surprises and impresses them, and that's gonna make them in turn lock into what you're doing and be more engaged in your questions. These guys get asked like 10, 15 questions a day, and a lot of it's nonsense. So if you bring some nonsense, they're just gonna blow it off in your face too.
It's funny because when you were talking about the concept of some media members trying to get that viral moment, I instantly thought back to I forgot what year it was exactly, but it was the year of Hurricane Harvey and when Houston was being flooded and stuff like that. And there was one reporter specifically asking Draymond Green. So essentially the question goes like, so you guys didn't play well in game 3 and you guys didn't make threes. Okay, whatever. And then game 4, there's a flood and then you guys are making threes. Is there any and it was like, are you how are you possibly trying to make these two things a correlating thing? Like people are out there losing
and that was
their
the
houses.
finals. That was the finals, right?
I'm honestly not sure.
It was the playoffs.
Yeah, it was definitely the playoffs, though. I know that. I don't know if it was the year that the Rockets lost in the second round or the year that the Rockets lost in the Western Conference Finals, but it was definitely one of those 2 years. And it was just like, and Draymond's like, dude, I know what you're trying to do. Stop asking me that. Like, I know you're trying to get a controversial statement out of me, and it's not going to happen. Stop talking to me. Like moments like those, or even when Chris Paul was on the Clippers, someone asks, is there going to be a game 7? And he's like, what am I supposed to do with that? Like, am I supposed to say, oh, it's over, guys, come on? Like, like it goes to your point of NBA players know bullshit from a real question. And within that, media members do need to be better with asking questions, because also at the same time, there could be times where players are being asked the same exact question 15 different types of ways, and it's like you have nothing else to talk about, really, guys. So I definitely agree with you there.
That's yeah. I like. I'm trying to think this year. Like Ime's gotten asked like 10 different times about the back-to-back games in the same city. Like, oh, do you like this? And it's like, come on, you've been here all season, and you know that's been asked like 5 times. And we have such a limited time with these guys now too. That does get frustrating. And to your point about the Harvey question, like it definitely comes out most when the cameras are on, and that's when you can tell it's really BS. That like they know it's on NBA TV. The people are asking a lot of this stuff, and in those moments, they're definitely trying to like get their face out there and have that moment that they can fire off on Instagram or Twitter or whatever it is. Like during the flow of the regular season, you're probably not going to be on camera a lot. I think I was like once this year asking a question, and like that was just kind of like timing. So the playoffs, there's a lot more people in there, people that haven't been there all year swooping in. It's good to be there and kind of have a feel for like what's been asked, what the storylines are, the familiarity with the people. Like, you know who my favorite person to interview is, especially in a press conference setting? Doc Rivers, by far. His personality just like takes over the room. I was in Philly a couple weeks ago. I haven't gotten to be like in person at the pressers a lot this year, but on the road you get the chance to a lot of the time. And when he comes in, like the whole room's just at attention. It was a packed room, obviously, because the Harden Simmons deal just got pulled off, and it was Harden's first game there against Boston. And like the way he just like engages with the people from Boston who like he knew from his days back there. He's like, "Hey, Gary," in the back of the room. I went on a Zoom once. I don't even know Doc. Like I didn't cover the '08 team, and like he's like, Bobby, I forget what I asked, but like he just like called me by my name and like just went on and on. And I asked a Harden question that day too that I got a great answer from. Say what you want about Doc the coach, that guy just, and this I think has earned him a lot of like leeway in his career when he's had some not so great finishes, is that he is just a people person to the T, and he makes you feel good no matter who it is. And I remember the stories in Boston of like him with the janitors and like him with the workers in the arena, and like he'd just be on a first name basis with everybody. And that's a great feeling. He is a guy that I would have loved to have covered as a coach. But I like Ime a lot too. I think Ime's got like a confidence and like no BS willingness to speak his mind that's really good, because the coach is often like what you're going to get the most stuff from, because the players don't love talking. They're just trying to get in there and get out. The coach is oftentimes doing like a lot of the messaging, the subliminals thrown at his own team or officials or whatever it's going to be. Like a lot of the time the story's coming from the coach. So you want a coach who's going to interact and be forthright. Brad got a little tricky with Brad at the end. He was really getting tight to the vest 8 years in, and that's going to happen. This is just Ime's first year. I'm sure he's not even going to say the starting lineup in a couple of years.
So last question, centered around you. If you weren't writing about basketball or talking about basketball or doing anything related to sports at all, what would you be doing?
Probably politics, or like economics. That was sort of like the other thing I was into in school. Obviously, just like social issues, I'm super into. Like stuff happening in city. Like I could very easily cover news, and I'd love to. Just like normal news with like a magazine or something like that. And there's a variety of different areas I'd be interested in. Obviously, I love music. Music, media is interesting. It's weird to me because, and like that's obviously your thing. Like we all the different stuff I talk about with access, that doesn't really exist in the music world. Like you kind of have to like carve those relationships out yourself, and it's hard because I think for big music stars, like a lot of the press handles itself, so they don't always feel the need to go out there and do a lot of interviews. Like the biggest music stars don't do interviews at all, like Beyonce and I know Bruno Mars and The Weeknd. I remember around the Super Bowl, like gave like his first interview ever in front of like a crowd of reporters. So that's got to be tough, I feel like. And there's obviously like a lot of opinion, as we talk about opinion here, that can go into it. And like reviews are big, and like a lot of different ways you can go with music. But for me, like getting to know the people and like telling the inside story, that looks really hard on the music side. And I'd like to try it one day for sure, but I don't know if I'd be up to the task. It looks tough.
Yeah, for sure. It's a lot of PR people and it's a lot of middlemen in between.
Yeah, and that's how sports is getting too, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right, so let's get controversial a little bit. How much do you like Rudy Gobert?
I like him, and I'm not contrarian, but I like to take the side of people who I think get bashed a lot. Like the numbers just speak for themselves. You look at the MVP chart; he's always up there every single year. The analytics on his defense say it's one of the best ever, just from how he prevents people going to the paint, and he gets unfairly bashed as like a failure each and every year when the 3 past years they've been one of the best teams in the NBA, which matters to me.
Mhm.
I know it's all about championships, but you're one of the best teams in the NBA year in and year out, and you have a fan base that can have a really fun year and get to the second round. Obviously, you want to get to the conference finals like they've been unable to, but he's doing his part in all of that. And I feel like it's other guys on that team who need to step up in the front office that's been very complacent at least the past few years in terms of getting like perimeter defense around them. It's all collapsed this year. I mean, they lost by 34 to the Pelicans the other night. That was bad. They've had a few losses like that this year. And listen, speaking of like the murmurings around a team, you definitely get a sense that him and Mitchell aren't really on the same page, which is probably a problem. And you don't know where that franchise is going to go over the next couple of years here. And they signed him a ridiculous deal too, which I will give you. That's crazy money for
Yeah,
Gobert.
like that is insane. Like it my issue with Rudy Gobert is not rim protection. If there's someone that just stand in front of the rim and protect the rim, he's one of the few players I'll pick. But in terms of overall, because there's so much more to defense than just rim protection. So like, for example, when you look at a Bam Adebayo who can also kind of protect the rim and also goes on the perimeter, that's more valuable to me than someone who's just going to protect the rim. You know, like I think that defensive player of the year is a award that is very much built on eye test and very much built on who are you guarding.
But he wins it.
Yeah, but like I don't think he necessarily deserves it half the time, if I'm being
Why do
honest
you
with
think
you,
he wins it though?
because his stats are up through the roof and people are
Mm-hmm.
just being lazy and people NBA media isn't watching the games. They aren't considering players like a Drew Holiday, for example, or players that like I remember I forgot what podcast it was, but on the pod, I think it's JJ Redick's podcast actually, and JJ Redick will ask players, superstar players, who is the one player that is the hardest to score on, and routinely players would say Drew Holiday, Drew Holiday, Drew Holiday. He doesn't get any type of look in terms of defensive player of the year, and I think that if players are saying this dude is the dude I do not want to score on because it's going to be so hard, he has to get some type of look, don't you think?
Yeah, I agree. The award's always been biased toward bigs, but if we're just comparing him to the other bigs, I think there's a floor that he gives the team that almost nobody else does. And I understand why he gets disrespect from players because, they're trying to go at it with the perimeter guys, and all of a sudden the big ass dudes inside just like get ready to swoop over and swat the ball away. Like it looks so easy and effortless, but the way he's been able to do it has built historic results. And I find that so impressive. And like people just kind of brush it off because he gets dunked on one time and they have a bad playoff loss and it looks like he's to blame. And the whole package of the year matters to me and what he's doing from day one through the very end to get them there. It's pretty impressive to me. Now, Mitchell's a big part of it too. I mean, the last
He's
10
the
games
biggest
I
part.
saw, yeah, they're in two when he plays. He's scoring 27 points a game. He's the engine there.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a rock too, and that rock's Gobert. You see them die when he goes out of there too, and that's why I think he's a real MVP candidate. I mean, their defensive system would just collapse without him out there, and that matters to me. I'm a big defense guy, and I don't think a lot of fans are. That's another reason he gets a lot of disrespect. It's a guy scoring 13 points a game, taking shots at the basket, and they're like, "Oh, what's so great about that?" There's a high level of defense that he's playing out there that I think even if you're watching the game, you can be impressed with. And listen, everybody does a different job with different teams. Like Bam's not as good of a shot blocker as Rudy. He's not as big, he's not as long. He can switch out to the perimeter, which is a big advantage for him. But the Jazz, if they're going to play the way they wanted with him, they got to get some perimeter defenders. And I was stunned they didn't go get a Harrison Barnes or Jeremy Grant. They got Nickeil Alexander-Walker, who's not even playing.
Wait, did
I
they
mean,
really? See, I didn't even know that. Like that shows how small of a deal that is.
they don't do anything. And they got Danny. Danny's supposed to be swinging big deals and throwing picks around. And no, that's not what he did at the end in Boston either. I don't
I want to
know.
say like you come on you know You definitely know.
So what's the point? They're definitely paying him big money, and he goes out there and gets Alexander Walker. And the only reason they did that is because Joe Ingles got hurt and they had to use his contract. Oh my God.
I mean, I also, going back to rumors and mumblings, I heard that something along the lines of the minute that the Jazz stopped being competitive, Donovan Mitchell's out. What do you think about that?
What was that?
The minute that the Jazz stopped being competitive, Donovan Mitchell's out.
Oh, so he's gonna try to leave. Yeah, I could see it, right? It's probably not great living in Salt Lake City, doing what he's doing. That he's definitely been understated as one of the stars and faces of the game. And sometimes your geography hinders you in that regard. Then on national TV a lot. They've definitely had some really disappointing finishes in the playoffs. And if the personalities aren't working, I could definitely see that. He's one of those guys, though, that stands to make a ton of money by sticking it out there for a little while longer, though. And I do think guys, seen with Bradley Beal and what Damian Lillard's doing right now, they're going to try to be a little more patient just to get that guaranteed money locked in, make some decisions from there. And I think what's underrated, we talk about like, oh, is Jason Tatum going to look to leave Boston one day? And, who's going to try to make the next super team? I think we see this with Russ this year, too. There's a greater trade-off, I think, happening between, do you want to play on a super team and become the Kevin Love or the Chris Bosh? Or do you want to kind of have your own setup, your own team, your own city? And I think that is getting really appealing to a lot of guys, like the fact that they can kind of run their own world if they're the guy on their team. And that's something obviously Tatum has in Boston. Mitchell, we'll see. I don't like, there's obviously a Rudy factor there too. Is it his team or is it Rudy's? And I'm
It's
sure
Donovan
like,
Mitchell's team.
yeah, but there's that competing interest there and that competing big personality in the room with the $34 million deal. So that gets a little tougher.
Mhm.
That conversation happens a lot with Brown and Tatum too, but I think that's been sorted out and they're more conciliatory and on the same page. And so that's able to work out better. But at the same time, if Brown gets to a point in a couple of years where there's an opportunity for him to go do his own thing, especially as a brand and as a player and a guy who missed the All-Star game this year, probably just because he was on a fairly disappointing team and the same team as Tatum. That's something that I think happens a lot, and that could definitely happen to Mitchell. It's all about what the opportunity is for him to jump to. Like, no one's going to New York. Remember Stan Van Gundy said that last week? Like, no one's going to New
Yeah,
York,
no.
and they're holding out hope. Where else are people going to? Like, what's the next great destination for guys? Miami's always out there.
Clippers. The Clippers are a really, really, really well run franchise. Like in the past 5 to 10 years, ever since they got rid of their previous owner, Donald Sterling, they are a really, really good franchise.
Yeah, they got their guys though. There's always room for one more, but it can be hard to fit three in there without killing the rest of the depth. And that's the other thing now too. Like the big threes, they've turned the big twos,
Mhm.
most places, unless like one of your stars is on a rookie deal like Minnesota. So yeah, most teams are just gonna be rolling with their two guys. And even Miami, it's Jimmy and Bam show there, and I don't know what that's gonna turn into because Lindo said it pretty well last week. Like, there's just no expectations there. Like, they've been great, they've been gritty. Now they're the one seed. Are there gonna be expectations now, or if they lose round one or round two, is it gonna be a disappointment? I'll give them some leeway because obviously they had that great finals run a couple of years ago, but people are just super satisfied with the Heat,
Yeah,
and
I
it
don't.
doesn't.
I think that a second round exit for them will be okay. I wouldn't be shocked if they make the finals either because they're a very. It's just culture. Like if you ask all the top 5 teams in the East right now, would you want to play Miami aside from Miami? Because obviously Miami's number one. They probably say no because they just know that it's just going to be a battle every single
Well,
time.
Boston learned that for sure a couple of years ago. Yeah.
Milwaukee has too, and to be honest, they probably might again if they face each other. I'll probably take Miami over Milwaukee in that series if I'm being
They
honest
got
with you.
swept last year.
I mean, they weren't healthy. Lots of COVID, lots of injuries around, but I think that a fully healthy Miami team is a team that could definitely play spoiler for some teams. I think the wall is still alive too. Like I think we're shifting to Milwaukee, talking about Milwaukee a little bit, but I think the wall is still alive. I think that if Giannis is still put in front of a wall, he's starting to make some jump shots now. And I'm seeing that and I'm like, okay, he starts to do that, then I'll start entertaining him possibly being the best player in the league. But if he's just gonna still be trying to run into people and all he can do is lay up or dunk, then it's like You got to give me more on offense
Well,
there.
you seen last night as we record this, he was just bumping through guys. And the Bulls, they're getting some guys back that can stand in front of him a little bit. They tried to throw Tristan Thompson in there, and he just went robo arm and threw it down in his face. There's a lot of resistance you can throw in front of him that he's still able to break through there. And there's just a sheer will too. That Heat game where he got the jump ball, and I know Spoelstra wasn't happy about that, the lack of a foul call there. But that's the kind of play Giannis makes, and this is why I love him. Like, he is so much more energetic and willing to put his nose in things than other stars. Like, there's an energy level that he plays with that most of the other guys who are coasting just aren't willing to show. Like LeBron and him, like, you compare those two, LeBron kind of puts it in neutral for a little while. Giannis, he's always full speed ahead, and he's willing to do a lot on defense that most stars aren't. He's like Rudy-esque on the defensive end in terms of his rim protection, and meanwhile, he's putting 30 points and
And he
5
can play
assists out there a
perimeter.
lot of nights. Yeah, so this guy, like, I think he's checked all the boxes. The last playoff run, that was the most invigorating thing I've ever seen. And he had a lot of doubters out there like you,
Mhm.
Harden. I thought it was pretty fitting that Harden just was stumbling around out there, losing to him after all the trash he talked.
I mean, at
And
the same
Giannis was kind of
time,
unstoppable.
At the same time, Harden was injured though. Like, let's not
Yes.
erase that. Like,
Well, listen, you're gonna talk all that trash, and then your time comes. Oh, you came up a little lame with the hamstring there. I think
yeah, I
it was
mean,
some karma.
it's not like Harden's fault. Is like, it's not like Harden was like, yo, I'm gonna have a hamstring right now, and then that's why we're gonna lose, and then nobody can blame me for it. It's
Well, we
just
know Harden wasn't in the best shape. We've been over this.
definitely what I mean. I think at least last year, because of the short turnaround from the year previously when the Lakers won the title, I think that it just put so many players just in general at a
Good
higher risk
point.
for injury.
Yep,
And
some guys are looking exhausted.
yeah, like let's just stay on James Harden for a little bit. Can you like there's never really been a time where James Harden was hurt in Houston. If he had all that rest, all the usual rest between from season to season, there was never really a time when he's hurt. There is
No, but he was putting in big minutes, and he was putting in all those games, and you saw it with Kemba there after his Charlotte run. He like just crumbled after he went to the Celtics because he was never resting. He was just
mhm.
going full speed ahead there. And there is, I think guys like LeBron and Kawhi who get a lot of crap for the games they sit out and the load management, there's a benefit to it that I think everybody's got to buy into a little bit. And I think the league has to take a little bit in terms of how it builds its schedule and in the future, because it's losing some stars just based on the guys who are willing to put on the uniform every night and play the big minutes when we know it's not conducive to having a long-term, healthy, sustainable career. It's, especially when I think there was a story written a couple years ago, I might have been in ESPN, that the kids, even like AAU kids, are just playing so many games,
Mhm.
so many minutes, putting such stress on their knees that's even shortening guys like into their careers. And there's not like a big emphasis on rest and recovery in the sport, and there needs to be, because it's just such a physically demanding sport, especially for the stars who are doing everything on both ends and playing the big minutes. And we've seen a lot of really tragic injury concerns over the last couple of years. And I do worry about Giannis a little bit. I worry about Ja just from the style that he plays with.
Ja is crazy because Ja will do anything. Ja will get
Yeah.
in the air for anything, and it's because he's very skinny. He doesn't really have much cushion as he falls, and just some of those falls, I do take a step back, and I'm like my breath is taken away, and I'm like, is like
There's a
I hope,
Rose factor with him
yeah,
that really worries you.
like is this the one where he might be out for 20 games and then it starts something else? Like, so I definitely agree with you. I think another point that I do want to kind of piggyback on that you talked about was the AAU factor too. Because I remember listening to all the former greats of the games, like the Isaiah Thomases or the Michael Jordans. They would always say, when basketball season is over, I did not play basketball. I did not play basketball until basketball started again.
That's what it
And
was
that's
too.
them talking about their time in high school or even in middle school, or even if they did they even play competitively in middle school. Like, so it's just the constant jumping up and down for 10 years before you even get to the NBA in the first place definitely plays a factor in how quickly the body breaks down.
Yeah, and there's a notion too that cross training helps with your recovery and your ability to stay healthy and all those different things. That's always been something that's been out there. And so, you play football season and you move into basketball season, it's different muscles, and then maybe you go and play baseball in the spring. Like that's something that I think at least for a while people thought was helpful and conducive to being in the best shape you can be and recovering the right way, instead of just playing basketball year round and putting the same forces on those same muscles. I remember Javonte Green, who plays for the Bulls now, when he was with the Celtics, I wrote a story about him. And, he was a football star. Football was his thing. He was a guy who was across multiple different sports, track as well, I believe. And so a guy with a more well-rounded career, he did end up having some injuries from playing football and different things, but I think he even mentioned the benefits of just doing different sports and focusing on different areas of your athletic regimen can have good benefits in terms of how you develop. And he's certainly a guy who has a great athletic repertoire and with how he dunks and gets up there and runs the floor. And some guys wear down. We've seen it with Zion. There's other concerns there, certainly. Some guys, Porzingis, there's a height thing there with him, but the injuries in the game today just kind of feel out of control. And it's hard to not look at the schedule, the upbringing, the specialization, because I don't know, we weren't around like the 90s and 80s, and guys were playing through more then too, which had its own issues, but it didn't seem like guys were just always hurt like they are now and missing massive time. And these stars with the knee tears, like half the league right now in terms of the stars are out at any given time, it feels like.
Additionally, I think that the NBA should, because I remember last season they didn't plan the second half of the season until after the All-Star break. I think that that's something that they definitely need to look at too, because I mean, while we did get a good game last night with Phoenix and New York, we got really lucky because that could have easily been a 30-point blowout. And there's just so many nights now where you want to sit down and you want to watch some national TV basketball, and it's unwatchable because by halftime the game's decided.
The
And
guys are
it's
missing.
and it's for the early game and the late game. So it's like tonight we have because we're recording this on Saturday. Tonight we have the Warriors and the Lakers playing tonight. I don't want to watch that. Like genuinely, I don't want to watch that. I love Russell Westbrook. I love LeBron.
Unless you want some laughs.
Yeah, like
and you're not laughing.
It's not. Yeah, I don't want to really watch that, and it's because of the fact that also on the other side,
I want to watch that for other reasons.
Oh yeah, because you're a Celtics fan, and I'm sure that brings you so much joy. But
not only that, they're just so funny. Oh, that video where Russ and who was it, Trevor Ariza and LeBron are arguing with the crowd. I mean, they are just straight comedy, and it is hilarious. And the fans' agony every single night on Twitter in those spaces. I've never seen a funnier thing than this Lakers team. And we knew it had comedy potential with the personalities that were being put together there, but we thought it would be good. And instead it has been a disaster. I got a question for you.
Okay.
Who's a bigger disaster this year, the Lakers or the Nets?
The Nets for sure.
Really? That surprises me.
Because the Lakers, in the words of Charles Barkley, you put all those geezers together and you expect them to win anything. It's kind of a tough ask. Now it's LeBron, and we've seen LeBron do the almost impossible many times before. So that's the only reason why I was really putting any stock into them having a finals run, because it's LeBron James, one of the best players, at least the second best, top 2 player of all time, period. But on the other side with the Brooklyn Nets, you got rid of Landry Shamet, who was spacing for Javon Carter, who you ultimately cut. You have Bruce Brown there already. Bring in DeAndre Bembry, another guy who basically does what Bruce Brown does. That makes no sense at all. There's no versatility on the roster. You have James Harden and KD there. Sure, Kyrie's not playing because he's not taking the vaccine or whatever. Cool. But at the same time, James Harden and Kevin Durant should be enough to still wreck the league. And watching those games and understanding that the spacing is such an issue that Kevin Durant, sure, is scoring over 2 people every time. James Harden is on the floor. Kevin Durant should never have to score over 2 people. But just the fact that they can help off of a Bruce Brown, or they can help off of a Blake Griffin, or they can help off of a LaMarcus Aldridge, because they know no matter what, they're not going to knock down that 3, is very important. So ultimately, James Harden forcing himself out of Philadelphia, I think that says more about Brooklyn than it says about James Harden, because the fact of the matter is that going into the season, they didn't put the guys around him or KD, because when you go back and look at James Harden's successful years in Houston, there's so much space in that paint. There was so much space. James Harden could probably get a 3-second violation just dribbling in the paint. because nobody can help off of Eric Gordon. You can't help off of Daniel House. You can't help off of Chris Paul when he was there. You can't do that. You can't help off of PJ Tucker in the in the corner, excuse me. And just the fact that James Harden and Kevin Durant, every time they even take one single dribble in the paint, there's two people there.
Well, there's parallels between all the three teams we just mentioned there. And I think the single line between them is you had major player influence in the personnel decisions in all those spots. The Nets, from the day Kyrie and Durant arrived, were pretty much set that they were going to be trading Allen, who's now an all-star, and LeVert.
Signing DeAndre Jordan too was
bringing DeAndre Jordan in, pushing that coach out the door, who's a pretty good coach, having Steve Nash in there, basically just holding the clipboard. No knock on Steve Nash. I just don't think he was cut out for the job in terms of preparation and coaching and having a career.
Handles.
Yeah, so none of that stuff worked. They had to dump Jordan, and Jordan was basically just there on a pretty big deal because the other guys wanted them. And so that cuts into your cap. You got 3 stars after you consolidate and put Harden in there. So you have even less room to spend on the rest of the roster. And it's all these minimum guys. Blake on his last legs. They got like those 2 weeks out of him where he was looking good at Detroit. Aldridge with all the health concerns he has. And like everything is just kind of failed from a personnel perspective there because of basically following the whims of the players there. And then Kyrie not showing up after all of it, I thought was pretty shameful after all the leeway that they gave him the past year and all the personnel decisions that he got to have a hand in, certainly. And then the Rockets, same deal. Like you talk about the great roster that was around them, credit to Morey, that was his whole thing there. And then all of a sudden Harden ships Chris Paul out of there and they end up with Russ and it doesn't look as hot. And then he pulls the wall trigger and all of a sudden he's looking out the door too. And that was even worse than Russ. So LeBron dictating the Russ trade, like these guys who just go in there and start like pulling all the different strings instead of leaving it to the front office, it doesn't go well. I don't think that's ever gone well with a team. And all 3 of those teams are paying the price, none more than the Rockets, who are just in pieces on the floor. Like they aren't even a basketball team right now.
I mean, I think the Lakers are paying the bigger price. The AD trade
because they had the most to lose, right?
Yeah, like the AD trade worked out. They got a ring, sure, but LeBron wasn't there for one ring. He was there for multiple. And when we're judging it based on that and the high standards of what it takes to be one of the top 2 players of all time, for him to, because I think he's going back to Cleveland. I don't think he's staying in Los Angeles. And also,
I said this too. We got to deliver the bad news to Lindo.
Seeing how Magic Johnson being pushed out the door happened, the fact that Rob Pelinka did nothing at the trade deadline at all. Jeannie, apparently Frank Vogel's game plans are being called from upstairs by Kurt Rambis, somebody who the only reason why I've heard of him before is because he was one of the Knicks failures at head coach. Just all of it, just for such a storied franchise. I think that the Knicks I think that the Lakers might be up there with the Knicks for fumbling the bag consistently. You're one of the most storied franchises in the NBA, one of the most storied franchises in history of any type of sport whatsoever. Probably only up there with like the Yankees and I guess maybe the Patriots, the Giants, whatever. And you can't attract free agents anymore because everyone looks over there and sees that it's a dumpster fire, no matter who's on the roster, because you have, again, one of the best players we've ever seen on the roster, and you can't get anybody. All you can get is Trevor Ariza and a washed up Carmelo Anthony. No disrespect, but Melo it's not New York Knicks Melo.
But how are you going to do better than that when you bring in Russ at $40 million? You don't have the money. You got Kendrick Nunn.
I mean, but you can still put pieces around him. Like, for example, like the thing that I like that Miami used to do is they used to get players they used to get players for less and sign them they'll still give them some money, but at the same time, their contribution would be way more than what they're being paid. Same thing with Golden State with Kevin Durant at times. Even Cleveland, when they won that ring, or like when they were consistently going to the playoffs year after year, there was always that guy he deserves to be paid more, but he's there because he wants that ring. And on the Lakers, that's just not a thing at all. Like why not try to get a Tony Snell, for example? Like, I understand that he's a good defender. He can also shoot. That would help out a lot. Even Garrison Matthews, like someone who doesn't get paid as much as probably it's not a minimum guy, but it's still closer to the minimum than a max type of guy who can also space the floor, shoot threes, and knock them down. Like, where is the creativity?
Yeah,
And
you gotta
that's
get
just
lucky. You gotta get lucky for sure, and the Heat have a lot of times, like they've been the gold standard with that, but not a lot of teams do that. Usually those guys are coming from your draft picks, and the way they signaled all their moves screwed them from a compensation standpoint with that Davis trade. I mean, the Pelicans, like, it's tough to say because the Lakers won the ring, and that carries a lot of weight, and that matters. Like, you'll trade anything for one ring. But man, did the Pelicans score. Ingram, Ball, Hart, who's really good, and now they flip for CJ. All these picks.
Kuzma. Oh wait, no,
You know,
Kuzma was still on the team. I'm all in. They had
they
Brandon
got
Ingram.
They
Yeah.
got Valanciunas with one of those Lakers picks. I mean, they pulled off a swindle with that deal in terms of just ripping all the depth away from the Lakers, and that's kind of the danger of consolidating now, is that the prices are so high. The Celtics even just did it with Derek White. They had to give up 2 firsts there, which is pretty high for Derek White, but you got to do it to go get those guys now. Like, that's the going rate, is giving up all these picks, and it kills your flexibility, especially when you're consolidating your roster around 2 or even 3 very high paid guys. When we talk about the big 2 versus the big 3, the good thing about the big 2 is you get some more leeway for, in LA Clippers case, like a Marcus Morris on a mid-level deal. Reggie Jackson's making medium money. Isaiah Hartenstein, Zubac has been amazing. Like, you have great role players. And you look at the Nets and the Lakers, it's 3 guys and everything else. And the everything else has been a whole lot of junk. And that's what you got to expect. And you know what? The Lakers, they actually got a lot of good guys. Like, you think of Carmelo Anthony on a minimum, Dwight on a minimum, Rondo, who basically want to bomb out of there, which should tell you all you need to know about the room there. Ariza, like, you don't love any of those guys, but in terms of veteran minimum, that's probably the best you can do. And it's probably going to get worse next year unless they do that Russ for Wall trade.
No, even the Wall trade isn't gonna do anything to make it better. I think that they need to.
But why not try?
Because John Wall and Russell Westbrook are essentially the same player, if we're really being honest. Like, John Wall also struggles with his jump shot. So if the thinking behind that is to do it so that John Wall spaces the floor better, he doesn't.
Yeah, but Russ does a lot of goofy stuff.
Russ is put in a situation where he's not allowed to be him. They literally broke him. Like, I sent in the chat, I believe either this morning or yesterday, when James Worthy was on Spectrum Sportsnet, and he was saying, I don't like seeing Russ with no turnovers because it means that he's not being aggressive. Well, he was being aggressive earlier in the season, and you didn't like that either. So be consistent. What do you want
they're so lost that they're looking for anything to figure out what's going on there, because it is just off the rails. But Russ, listen, I'll even put my personal distaste for him aside, because I don't love his game at all. I never really have. He never fit with LeBron. I was trying to imagine it preseason, because I didn't think this was going to be a disaster. Like, I was trying to think of the ways that it might work, but I was like, I got to see this, because you just can't imagine how LeBron and Russ playing together is going to work. Like, you still can't. Try to think of some adjustments there, and it's like, maybe Russ will roll or something, or he'll cut off the ball, or LeBron will catch and shoot some threes, and Russ has like, that stuff just isn't going to happen. It never was. And so for LeBron to look at that as a basketball genius, a really smart evaluator of the game, how he looked at a couple guys around him in Kuzma and Pope, and even Harrell was solid for them last year, even though he wasn't on the title team. How he would just dump all that out the window for a guy who there was really no path to playing together with. It's still stunning to me, and it's going to go down as one of the worst mistakes in NBA history, because they had a championship core, and now it is gone. Like, they have no chance of ever getting back to the finals.
I think the reasoning behind that was because last season, when LeBron is off the floor, there's no point guard. There's nobody there's no way for them to score at all. If LeBron's on the floor, they can score, but if LeBron's off the floor, there's no way. And I think the reasoning behind getting Russell Westbrook was, here's a guy who's led the league in assists many times, who's one of the best point guards we've ever seen. And let's put the ball in his hands, and let's have him run the second unit, and also just dictate our offense. Now, it kind of hurts when Frank Vogel knows nothing about offense in the first place, and he doesn't know how to make that work because,
Davis was shooting 13% from three.
yeah, like it doesn't, like, as much as you want to say, okay, well, or people want to say that the Russ trade is bad, you have to look at everything around it and the fact that Russ was never put in a situation to be successful in the first place. They have Malik Monk and Austin Reeves bringing the ball up instead of Russell Westbrook. He literally led the league in assists last year, and you don't want to put the ball in his hands. I understand the concerns about high turnovers or whatever, but at the same time, giving him that power and understanding how in a locker room he can energize guys around him if he is allowed to be himself, and essentially saying, we don't want you to be yourself. And now
Yeah.
you're wondering why the team has no energy, why they can't sustain runs, why they have moments where they go on when they're the victims of 30 to 6 runs in the middle of the third quarter to the Los Angeles Clippers without Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. You're wondering why. It's because the guy who was supposed to establish that culture of, we're going to be high energy and we're going to play with pace, you took the ball out of his hands and you took away whatever credentials the team is looking for him to do.
Well, you got to
And
defend. If you're going to do all that, you got to defend. And they're two guys, they just don't. LeBron, he hasn't defended at a high level in a long time. Russ, like, even you got to admit, he is a bad defender. He is. He
he's
doesn't play with commitment on that end. He doesn't play positionally sound. He wanders and he gets lost. And if you're not piling up stops, how are you going to play fast and run out and play transition basketball? They get lit up every night. And that's where I give Davis some leeway. He's glass, but when he's out there, they're much better defensively.
No, they are for sure. I think that Davis, the one thing about Davis is not his ability at all. And the reason why I personally don't think he's ever going to be a top 5 player again, it has nothing to do with his ability. It's literally just, can he stay on the floor? And for the past 2 seasons, and even in New Orleans before he even won that ring in Los Angeles, he couldn't stay on the floor.
Yeah.
And as some people say, the best ability is availability. And more times than not, Davis doesn't have that.
And you can tell where he's going with the way they're playing now. I mean, they are packing it up. They're done. And like you said, I had a feeling a long time ago there'd be a LeBron bounce here. And the way he's playing right now, looks like he's kind of throwing in the towel on this. And I don't know, is there going to be a demand for like his GM to come in? Is there going to be a fight with ownership over that? They seem pretty committed to Pelinka.
I don't know
And
why.
if well, just out of loyalty, I think. You know, they got their people there. They want the franchise to stay intact. And let's be real, the Cavs took a little bit of a similar stand when LeBron was heading out of there. You want to make even more moves than they did in 2018, giving up extra picks and such. And they said no. And that was the end of LeBron in Cleveland. And will it be Cleveland again this time? I think there's a good case for that. I think there's a good trade that these two teams could make for LeBron, sending some stuff back that the Cavs aren't necessarily using right now. And all of a sudden the East would be even scarier than it looks right now. The thing is with LeBron, he's gotten worse. He
Mm-hmm.
has, and he's not a guy that can carry you just out of his sheer will now. Like, he's going to have to himself make a adjustment into this next stage, not only as a player, but as a role in an organization, because you're going to have to function as a team. Like, it can't just be his show and him figuring it out if he makes some mistakes in terms of personnel. Like,
He
they're
needs
going
to
to
come
have,
off the ball.
yeah, they're going to have to build a good team around him too that makes sense with him. And listen, he can't get to Cleveland and start talking about how they're going to trade Mobley for
Or
like
Garland,
who's one of his buddies floating around.
Draymond.
Draymond, yeah. Like, they'll trade Mobley for Draymond. Like, that chirping will start immediately. And that's why, like, I know some Cavs fans who don't want him back. They don't want that whole experience. And I understand that, even if you do have a pretty good chance, if you get LeBron right now, of winning a championship next year, they want to do their own thing. And I understand that. If people don't want it, I understand that.
Really quickly before we wrap it up a little bit. What are your general thoughts on the MLB lockout?
Oh, it's shameful. And it's just more lost momentum for the sport. And I love it. I always will. And I'll always sit down and watch a baseball game. I'll always go to even like a minor league game. I think I could see myself doing that this spring because I just love the game. But there's so many people that don't. There's so many people that need something more. And the MLB's not giving it to people. And they're going to lose more and more fans. They're going to probably have a lot more issues like this over money, off some owners who are trying to make a profit in this more than compete and be on the cutting edge of things. Because it's almost like an old oil company or something. Like it's just pumped out so much money for these families and these ownership groups over the years that that's what they expect. And if it starts slipping, there's going to be more butting heads with players who I think in their own right have kind of been pampered, I'd say, compared to other athletes in other leagues. I mean, they've had the most money, the most guaranteed contracts. So I think there's a unwillingness for them to waver a little bit too here, especially on competitive issues like pitch clocks and changes that need to be made to the game itself. I remember where
Playoffs.
I remember where Tease at spring training, like in one of his last years, was like, you'll never speed the game up. It's just the way it is. They're never going to do anything. He was swearing. And listen, like the baseball players, they're very stubborn on this stuff. Like they do not want to be told what to do. And they've always been very powerful with the union there. And like, I'm a labor players guy on this stuff. But at the same time, I think the owners got a point here in their own right of saying we got to change some things up here from a competitive standpoint. I think there's a lot of really interesting issues here if you care about MLB, like the floor, a lot of teams tanking. That has just killed the sport. In recent years, you have these teams that just stink and can't muster any competition, and it's done on purpose to cut costs. And obviously you get draft picks out of it and everything else that can eventually get you back to the top. That's what the Astros did to get good. That's what the Marlins were trying to do, but it didn't really work. Rays do a good job with that. There's just a lot of like small market, low cost teams that don't go all in on spending the money and doing what they need to do. There's marketing issues with the sport. I think like they're inching in the right direction on that stuff. Like the Red Sox had a really exciting, like personable team last year that the city really got into. The place was packed. They were letting people in on cheap tickets for the playoffs. And so it had like a very college feel to the crowd there. And it was electric. And now, boom, like slam on the brakes. The sport's not happening for who knows how long here. And guess what? People aren't going to care. Like no one cares that this is going on right now. And that is the worst thing possible for them because it's going to be tough to get people back. That happened in the 90s with the strike. It was tough to get people back. And now you don't have the home run chase. You don't have steroids. You don't have these big personalities like Barry Bonds, A-Rod, and Ortiz and everyone else. That's some great players. I think there's a lot of players that could be marketed better and
Shohei
would be very
Ohtani is
popular.
very
Yeah.
marketable.
So, man, it's just sad, right? Because we both love the game.
Mm-hmm.
We know there's potential there. We know there's very easy fixes,
Mm-hmm.
and they're just all unwilling to compromise on it. And this is the greatest example. They're going to miss April
Yeah.
over some nonsense.
All I wanted to do was watch Max Scherzer pitch for the Mets come March 31st, and now it looks like that's going to be pushed back to probably the end of April at least. Also, one thing that someone I forgot, I was watching something that got brought up too. There's a risk of Jackie Robinson Day not happening, and the reason why that's extremely important this year is because it would be the 75th anniversary of Jackie Robinson's first game in the Major League Baseball. So for them to like I'm not saying like that's the most it is very, very important, but it's just like an added slap in the face to baseball fans who like, I love when they have Jackie Robinson Day and everyone's wearing 42 and you can't tell who's who, but it's all you know is they're wearing 42. And the reason why I'm confused today is because they're honoring one of the best baseball players and one of the most impactful Americans of all time. And the fact that that's not going to happen on the 75th anniversary says a lot to me as well.
And you know what else says a lot when it comes to Jackie Robinson? Howard Bryant said this the other day. He called baseball boring. He said, I cannot watch a baseball game. It's fun to play. I'm not watching that. And that was years, like what? When was Jackie Robinson alive? The 60s? And it was quicker then. It definitely was. Now, 4 hours,
Yeah.
4.5 hours
for a playoff game.
hours?
That's a lot. That's an ask.
No one can do that. No one. The diehards, and they're so few and far in between these days.
So we have this last segment here where it's time for you to speak your piece, and I'll basically give you a minute to promote or say whatever you want. So your minute starts now.
All right, we're on bostonsportsjournal.com, clnsmedia.com, Celtics All Access on YouTube. We do great stand-ups after every game segments. We got Dome Theory, the podcast, a lot more, I'd say, topical, timely things we talk about on there rather than the Celtics week in and week out. But we do some Celtics shows too on there, mostly talking about other teams from other angles. So go get that on Spotify, iTunes. And I read at CelticsBlog.com as well and at Real Bob Manning on Twitter. That should be it.
Alrighty. Still got to talk about Saba, but maybe in a
We'll
future
do that soon.
podcast
Maybe
episode.
on Dome Theory. We're trying to get I think we'll get a weekly group chat from our group chat going on Dome Theory. I'd love to start doing that with the whole crew there. So stay tuned for that. And more on that show. We're going to try to do a lot of experimental stuff over there, which is going to be fun this year.
I'm excited to watch it all happen and be a part of some of it too. Once again, you can check out Dome Theory on Spotify and iTunes, as Bobby Manning said. You can also connect with Bobby Manning on Instagram and Twitter. All the links to the description will be found. All the links to what I just said and all the things that Bobby Manning just plugged will be available in the description and also on oldmilk.co. Thank you for watching and listening. This has been It's All Opinion Podcast, episode 5. That's Bobby Manning over there. Like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow Old Milk on Instagram and Twitter at Old Milk Media. And once again, stay safe and wash your hands just to make sure that you're clean. And I will see you next time. Thank you for listening and watching.